I wanted to call the theory that I'm working on or that I'm promoting here. I want to call it voice theory because I thought it seemed like it. Well, because that was the metaphor that worked best for me. The first metaphor that worked well for me. To imagine, if you imagine you are a single voice, um, imagine that, then understand that you don't exist, and in fact what you see as a single voice is a whole bunch of different voices, each representing their own thing. So all the mind's different networks, modules, whatever you want to call it, mechanisms, whatever, these are each a voice that speak up, and that can produce behavior by speaking into the sort of microphone in the brain. But see, here's the thing. That microphone, the idea is basically if you imagine a room, maybe we can imagine like a courtroom, um, and you have a bunch of different lawyers, witnesses, and just people invested. And then each of them is just saying their piece, reacting to those immediately around them. And then there's some microphone in the room, and maybe this guy whispers to this guy, whispers to this guy, who then grabs the microphone and speaks. And that speaking through the microphone, that announcement, or that speaking through the microphone, is the production of a verdict from the courtroom. So then over the course of a day, the microphone gets grabbed lots of times, lots of things get sent out by different parties in the courtroom. And there's not the organization that we imagine. It doesn't all pass through one judge who is then in charge of sending out the behavior, the verdict. So we have the judge myth, right? There is no judge, so it's basically just whoever grabs the microphone and whoever they were influenced by. That's the last person in the chain before behavior or verdict is produced. The problem is that every time I would explain voice theory, I had people were imagining, we're still maintaining this judge myth, this ego myth, and so they were seeing it as a bunch of people in the courtroom talking to them, to you. Um, and I didn't think the voice metaphor wasn't helping rid people in the few times that I tried. Didn't seem to be helping people, didn't seem to be helping disabuse people of this notion that there's a central voice who's holding the microphone and then who's hearing the voices around and is being influenced by them. I want to disabuse people of that. There's no central figure. Just whoever grabs the microphone. There's different people who have their hands on the microphone at any given time. As David Eagleman said, many sets of hands on the steering wheel of behavior. So I was frustrated to be explaining voice theory, trying to get someone to have this image of a whole bunch of different voices rather than a single voice. But then basically, they would just then imagine that single voice as being a single receiver of all of these other voices, and then the ultimate deliverer of the verdict. And these voices were just input, advice, whatever, rather than consequential processes. Okay. All right. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to do this one last time. The correct metaphor for me is to imagine a whole bunch of people in the heiress courtroom who are each sort of getting, you know, and lots of them get their hands on the microphone and send out a behavior that's attributed to Eris. The problem was that using the term voice took away sort of the agency, the determinism of these characters grabbing the mic, and made it just that they were speaking their opinion, but they had no ultimate control over behavior, and they're still you, the central unit, that based on the voices that you hear, then executes a behavior. Okay, so how do we? So voices was not good at it. It just seemed to encourage for people, and people would think that they understood the theory, and they'd say, yeah, like you said. Then sometimes we'll like hear these different impressions, hear these voices, and then it's up to us, what we end up doing. Like, no, there is no. No, it's up to us, as in all the different voices interacting. Anyway. So I've been using on my channel the term mechanisms to try to remove the agency, the humanity from the mind, so that we can really see it as just machine parts interacting. And then what I would name... So mechanisms has felt the most natural. It seems to be the easiest to move away, to keep the discussion away from this idea of a central figure who's hearing the voices, right? So it's just mechanisms acting. Forget your central figure thing. Just mechanisms interacting. And they're not all like going through one mechanism, okay? And different ones can trigger the motor cortex, can trigger speech, and anyway. So then maybe we could call the theory Neo theory, because it's kind of, Neo was a great help in my developing of an understanding of the mind. Realizing that he and I aren't all that different, seeing his simpler input-output machine, his less nuanced input-output machine, to at least the things that are important to me. Obviously, his input-output machine is more nuanced in its reception of smells, but still, how many different behavioral outputs are there? Yeah, so no, I do generally just have a input-output machine that's much more nuanced than his. So Neo theory, which is cool. What's cool about his name is that he was already named that when I got him. And I made a comment to my mom because, Neo from The Matrix. I think that's why he was named that way. His owner was a big fan of The Matrix, so yeah. I just never asked that specific question. But anyway, so I remember I called my mom. I said, he's the one, right? And then it wasn't until a little bit later that I realized that one is an anagram of Neo, or Neo is an anagram of one. And so, and I do think that Neo theory, voice theory, this understanding that we are this set of mechanisms determined by evolution, and that there are, the ego myth is a myth, and the judge myth, and integration myth, and all that is a part of this package that I want to name and I want to present to you guys, and then I want to take some credit for. And it is kind of a unifying theory, because it's actually not that profound of an explanation. It's actually just really what's obvious once you get past certain illusions of intelligence and stuff. But once you're just like, oh, I'm a brain, then the necessary corollaries of all that are the things that I want to call Neo theory. But it's profound in that because we have all these illusions of intelligence and all that, so we're really confused. We tend to be really confused about why people make the decisions that they make, about our own behavior. We're really bad at anticipating our own behavior. We're really good at confabulating, but really bad at seeing past our confabulations. It has to do with this. I mean, it's everything that we do. It's a recognition of what the mind is, that it's a brain. That they are one in the same. The whole theory, it's a question of self-awareness, of am I this intelligent spirit or am I a brain? And then if so, well, what does that automatically mean? Okay. So because it's the theory is sort of, it's meant to be a paradigm shift, and not just a perspective shift, but also a substance shift, a change in what we see ourselves as, well, any change in what we see ourselves as is going to be pretty consequential in the things that we do. And you realize, and also people talk about, so I always talk about the mind, and everything always comes back to neo theory for me, not just on this channel, but in daily life. And people are like, oh, there's more stuff than just the brain and the mind. And all right, look, I can't judge how justified my obsession is. I know I have OCD. I know I'm autistic or somewhere on the spectrum. So obviously I've got my thing. Okay, so I am in no position to judge whether or not my thing is as important as much as, as relates to how much I talk about it. But also, I am talking about a fundamental change in our concept of the mind. And the mind is at the root of all things, human things. Interpretation, perception. I mean, it doesn't even need to be explained. Everything happening here is between two minds. And how those minds function is, of course, then important to everything that minds do. And we see how consequential it is. And I was reading now about this. There's this political scientist. Check out all these articles that he has. Oh yeah, I'll just use that screenshot. So I was going to do a video earlier, so here's the screenshot. Well, anyway, I'll just keep talking. So, obviously the mind is important to everything that the mind does. Anyway, so it is sort of it's a unifying in that we realize, just like with evolution, we realize that pretty much every question we have about biology, we need to go back to evolution. What were the natural pressures that this species faced? And how can we understand their traits within that frame? And understanding the basic mechanisms of evolution and so on, and genetic development and so on. So just like everything about our biology comes back to the sort of origins and nature of our biology, the mechanisms by which our biology came to be what it is. Well, everything about psychology goes to evolution as well. And then my whole thing is just the corollary of evolution. Ultimately, it goes back to evolution. In order to understand in order to be able to look at behavior and so on in the context of evolution, we have to understand that we are brains that are a bunch of mechanisms that evolved. And that we are not these intelligent magical spirits, these first cause agents that can just produce behavior and rationality and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, so you look at biology, like, hey, what's biology? What's going on? Got to look at evolution. Evolution becomes like a sort of a unifying or a single response to a ton of different questions. Why do we got those diseases? Why do we got that many arms? Why this? Why that? Why this? Why that? Evolution's going to be your guy to answer those questions. Same thing for psychological stuff, because it's a brain. And I just want to add the little piece that the mind is much like another organ in the body. Well, actually, no, it's quite different in a lot of ways because there's a lot more competition. Anyway, so we need this voice theory, that plus evolution. Anyway, look, I think I'm trying to, I don't know, it doesn't matter. So it's kind of a unifying, or it's kind of a single response, or a single way to understand. So anytime I'm talking to someone, and we're talking about the mind, we're talking about we're talking about their interpretations, we're talking about their decisions, their social interactions. A lot of times social interactions, I'm going to go straight to evolution. And then if they're like, oh yeah, but here's the thing, that person should know better. He's an intelligent, reasonable person. She's not an idiot, so she must have been doing that in order to get to me. Oh, okay, hold on. Yeah, I understand. She's a brain, and you're a brain. So first of all, one of your mechanisms is to always sort of presume bad intentions. Of course, we evolved that way watch out to catch threats. We're not supposed to apply that as much to our friends and family, but in the world we live in now, we don't really sort of forge as deep of connections with people because we just don't spend the same amount of time with people, experience the same sort of amount of things. Whereas, back in the day, we would grow up with people, we would go hunting, we would gather, we would go hungry with people, we would feast with the same people. And so, and now we're sort of on guard with everybody because we don't really get to form that real in-group. We just got these sort of superficial in-groups that last a few years while you're in school or whatever, but quickly they can just fall apart like that. Okay. So there you go. So that's an example of how our understanding of the brain, having self-awareness, that the brain is the brain, and that we are these mechanisms. So you have, for instance, this mechanism, which is going to interact with this. The myth of integration, just because your friend could know, or a part of your friend, some of the mechanisms in your friend would demonstrate knowledge of how this thing would make you feel. The behavior did not come from that part necessarily. That part didn't necessarily interact. Those mechanisms didn't automatically interact with the mechanisms that sort of grab the mic and produce the behavior. So they were over there in the courtroom talking, voicing, and then there's a cabal over here talking, voicing, working each other up. Yeah, okay, blah, blah. Grab the mic, send out the thing. And then because we don't have the humility to realize that we are voices, well, there wasn't a guy in the courtroom that goes, hey, yo, you guys, I know we're a whole bunch of different mechanisms, remember? So just because you guys didn't grab the mic doesn't mean it hasn't been grabbed. Because then what happens is we confabulate. Someone says, hey, why was that the verdict? Okay, it's put on the speakers in the courtroom. And then those guys who are talking come over and make up some bullshit, not even knowing, and the whole system doesn't know they're making it up. Anyway, self-awareness, we can start installing mechanisms that realize, oh, there are different mechanisms in here, and let me try to help them interact. Anyway. All right. Back to the naming. So it's cool to call it the one theory. Bit presumptuous, maybe, but seems to make sense to me, and I think my ramblings support that. Now, here's another option. Oh, by the way, an alternative to voice that was even that I've had for a few months is psi. So like psi from like psychological, and so you've had all these different psis who are talking amongst each other and sometimes grabbing the behavior mic. And in French that works well because that's what they call a therapist. Your psi, your psi. But then you start imagining therapists. It can be easy to forget that they're just talking amongst themselves, that you are just the sum of the discussions. It's easy to start imagining you as being the patient of just lots of therapists, and so that you still exist and you're in the system. And so that one I didn't love. All right, so here's another one. I got another one for you, and this is, what about IT? IT. It's an acronym. If then, because ultimately every mechanism, and then the brain as a whole, it's an if-then. If conditions A through Z, then output A through Z. Or I guess I shouldn't do it complete. So if conditions A, B, C, D are G, then output B, Y, C, T, P, F, whatever. And then each individual, hopefully we can look at, over the next 100 years, we'll be able to get to unitary sort of mechanisms. So this mechanism, it responds like maybe it's a cell or maybe it's a few cells. But when this very specific piece of information comes in, then they produce that very specific response or contribution to the overall discussion between the different the different its, the different if-thens. And so here are some other good things about it. One, you've got IT, like information technology. It keeps us thinking about, keeps us, trying away from the whole humanity, central intelligent spirit thing, and we're just imagining circuits, and which can be good, can be helpful, because it's very easy for us to not see ChatGPT as conscious, intelligent, aware, to see it just as a product of its programming. Harder for us to. So if we think of us as IT, as something that belongs in the IT field, circle, domain, realm, arena, then maybe it'll be easier for us to let go of some of those, or to think without those myths. Another example, another thing. So the word it in French is ça. So it. Freud, right? He has his superego, ego, and id with a D. But in French, it's ça. So it's it in French. So that's another thing that's cool. So even if we aren't thinking IT, if we're thinking psychological, but we've heard in passing this idea of superego, ego, and id. You talking about the different its of our brain keeps us away from talking about ego, because that thing doesn't exist. That's just a myth. Instead, we're just the sum of we're just an id, really. In a very loose definition of it, we're just an id. We're just those basic instincts, basically. The ego is an illusion. Superego is just another part of the id. Engagement with the id. But again, like I said, a loose definition of id. But basically how the word id kind of makes us feel without much knowledge for Freud's theory. It's like the id is the sort of basic, automatic, instinct, intuition, primitive, whatever. All right, great. That's us. And throw in some its that are a little fancier and stuff, and that respond to the more basic its. And then you've got the machine. But that lack of agency, that lack of intelligence, that automaticness that we associate with the id should be associated with the whole brain. And so that's the advantage of that. And then we could call it as it theory. So here's what's in the running: voice theory, neo theory, it theory. Issues are, how do we best, when people hear this, when we try to explain to people that you are a set of mechanisms, and that are just doing their thing, when we try to explain that to people, how do we try to keep off stage, out of mind, the central human character that we're inclined to believe? I think voice theory allows that too much, even encourages it. Or we just somebody just help me explain the voice thing better. That there's no intermediary. These voices are just hearing from the outside and responding to the outside. And then you are the sum of all that. You are not in that, hearing the voices, blah, blah. Now, some of them are heard. That is part of the conscious experience, and that's one of our vocabulary, heard. It's like when you have an impression of something, you say heard, blah, blah. And basically what that is there's a mechanism in the brain that when some cabal is speaking amongst themselves, there's just another guy in the courtroom that goes, hey, can you just say that a little louder for everybody else? And so this way we can acknowledge, we can have on the record, you spoke and you participated in our discussion. But that is just one of the mechanisms, and that's not the same mechanism that does other things. So there's still no you. So it's not like you go around and say, all right, hey, all right, I'm hearing this. I'm hearing that, and then this is the same you that then says, okay, let me make a reasonable decision, and let me go get the mic now. No. Okay. All right. So that should make sense to some people, and let me know. I'm most interested. I just got giddy imagining someone putting a comment that puts like the perfect phrasing of this voice thing that makes it just really easy for someone to understand. These are not external voices talking to me. It is that what I am is a bunch of voices talking out and talking amongst themselves and then talking to the world. I'm just the bag that they're in.